Good afternoon and welcome on the topic that is organized by Media Center in Chaglavica through the support of the Initiative for Peaceful Changes. Nazmiye Bala, advisor to the Minister of Justice, Viona Krasnici from the Network Women of Kosovo, Nena Drikalo from the NGO Ruke Uruci, and Niman Haidari, Deputy Ombudsperson. Welcome again. Just to mention to the panelists that they have 5 minutes for their presentation. During the last week, Kosovo has been shocked by the raping of young girls, and especially the 11-year-old girl in Pristina, and then they shed light into some cases in Istok, Gilan, Klima, and Ferizaj. So we had massive protests in Pristina, and so far some high officials of Kosovo police have resigned. Mr. Krasnici, the Network Women of Kosovo, took part in the protest organized on the 1st of August in Pristina against sexual violence. The protest asked that similar acts should be alarming for the state, and women and girls should be treated, and the doers of the action should be punished without any compromise. Has anything been achieved in this direction, and what is, according to your opinion, and how many victims believe in institutions? Initially, recently, especially during the recent years in Kosovo, we have seen that these sexual violence cases against women are increasing continuously. Even in the protests that were organized recently, one of the main requests was the maximal responsibility for all the victims of sexual violence by institutions, as well as reaction against the patriarchal system. These were the main demands or requests, so that the perpetrators can be brought to justice by imposing maximum sentences without any aggravating circumstances, because in such cases, when we have to deal with sexual violence, rapers should be imposed only maximal sentences, and to take only aggravating and circumstances as requested by the Criminal Code of Kosovo. These gender stereotypes unfortunately continue to be part of our society. But what is going on, what will happen if these gender stereotypes are believed in the prosecutorial and judicial center and representatives of Center for Social Work, as it happened recently, and representatives for the Office for the Protection of Victims? Because if these officials, institutional officials, continue to believe to these gender stereotypes, then we shall have lack for the punishments on merit, because at the end judges do not impose sentences on merit to the perpetrators, in this case to the rapers. In the government strategy, which should be implemented as of 2022 to 2026. In its 4-year program, the government has made the fight against domestic violence and against women as a priority. One of the main objectives of this strategy is the institutional empowerment, prevention, and identification of violence. These objectives would be very good to be implemented, so that the perpetrators would get meritorious punishments. And if these objectives were implemented, then sexual victims would be more safe. Thank you, Ms. Krasnici. Lately, we have heard a lot of accusations directed to the law authorities, especially to the judges and prosecutors who were in a part perpetrators. And around 90% of them have been released, and after 48 hours spent in pretrial detention. How do you evaluate the latest incidents, and what is the fault of the system, and what should be done in order to prevent such criminal offenses? The floor is yours. Thank you for the invitation. It is special for me to be with you today on the topic that is the biggest preoccupation in our country, and especially when we speak of women and girls. We should accept a fact, because this fact from time to time is being collided, how to say, conditionally with the reality and what we see in our daily lives. We should publicly acknowledge public punishment as a discriminating form of girls and women. We should also accept as a fact the phenomenon which is happening almost every day. And also we should accept as a fact that violence against women and girls, gender violence, domestic violence are criminalized, and they are very well addressed through criminal code. What we see in our daily lives and in practice is exactly that the rapers walk freely, and they are almost in our surroundings. If we take the latest statistics, over 85% of girls, especially, are of minor age. It means we have to do with a large number of girls that are victims of sexual rapings. We can easily address the failure to only one institution. But in fact, what happens and what is happening is that there is non-implementation, or how to say, there is a kind of non-accountability and non-responsibility from justice institutions, in this case the prosecution and the justice. I say this because we have a practice, and there are various reports, be they local or international, that address very well the issue of institutions, and especially the failure and the implementation of the law, and the failure of the imposing of final decisions as foreseen by the criminal code. I am addressing this because this is not the coping of the Ministry of Justice, but the Prosecutorial and Judicial Council, but it is the coping of the demand and the negligence of the demand. So requests of the protesters are legitimate, and I think that these requests are old. They are not new, because rapes are not going on only in the last quarter, but they happen almost for years on. When I say that they happen continuously, we have eclatant cases from the judicial cases and the decisions that are rendered by the justice authorities or municipal courts in different municipalities. The most eclatant case is in Peja, where the judge issues a decision for a rape, a group rape, and she punishes them with 8 months and lets them on condition. And we have the other decision of the case where the victim has been punished. So I totally agree with the previous speaker, who very well addressed the phenomenon of rape and punishments that are issued by the judiciary. So funny judgments and sentences, they are sentences that encourage rapers to further continue with the criminalized offenses. There is the strategy and plan of action based on which we as Ministry of Justice, we are working in its implementation. Currently, what we are doing is that we are drafting for the first time, after 22 years of our local institutions, the state protocol on treating the cases of sexual violence. So this protocol is being drafted together with the Network Women of Kosovo, with the direct support from ULEX and UN Women. And also based on this protocol that we shall continue in assessing the situation concerning the construction of the center for the referral of these sexual violence cases, because the document and the institution lack or short to the state. Let us not forget that we have a protocol on the state level which emerges from the law, and we have to deal with standard procedures of operation. In the latest case of the 11-year-old girl, there was no thorough investigation because we deal with the failure of the implementation of the standard operation procedures. And if they had been implemented fully, this document or these procedures, we wouldn't have had victimized the case, the 11-year-old case that happened in June and then in the period of August. Yes, we have reportings on daily basis, and it's good to report them because they were not reported in the past. But this does not mean that we shall be satisfied only with the reporting. Every reporting should be followed with the detailed management of the case up to the last procedure, in this case to the decision according to the offense by the judiciary of Kosovo. Of course, we have a lot to talk, but because of the room and space in this panel. Thank you, Ms. Baya. The ULEX has published the report on the action of the judicial system of Kosovo, and you are doing a lot of campaigns in increasing awareness concerning women and sexual harassment. What should Kosovo do according to you? In fact, change so that the system would be more efficient when we talk about these criminal offenses?
Thank you, Katerina, also for the invitation to such important debate. As you mentioned, the ULEX mission in Kosovo has been engaged in monitoring, advising, and reporting Kosovo judiciary and institutions specific on forms of gender-based violence. And this has become particularly important since the adoption of the Istanbul Convention back in September 2020. Specifically on the aspect of sexual violence cases, in 2019 we launched the Speak Up on Time campaign together with the Institute of Forensic Medicines, where we started putting a big emphasis and importance of raising awareness, especially among young people, of what is sexual violence and what to do if someone falls victim of sexual violence. As you mentioned, in July 2022, as part of our monitoring activity, we launched the report on assessment of handling of rape cases by Kosovo justice system. But also let me mention that, like Ms. Bala mentioned before, we've been assisting the Ministry of Justice since 2021. We created a roadmap on establishing specialized services for victims of sexual violence, and following the Ministry of Justice decision to establish the working group in charge of drafting the protocol in March 2022. Since then, we have been supporting the work of the working group. So specifically on the findings on our report, which we issued in July in 2022, we wanted to look strictly on how Kosovo judicial system handle cases of rape. Specifically, we looked at the past 3 years from 2019 to 2021. As Ms. Bal already mentioned before, the statistics tell us that 85% of victims are minor girls. We looked at aspect of criminalization, and the report stated how the Kosovo legal framework is in line with international standards. And what do we mean by this? Is that also in Kosovo, the criminal offense of rape is criminalized as a consent-based criminal offense. We then looked at the aspect of delays of proceedings and a number of reasons for termination of cases, including acquittals at the judgment level. And what the report found is that the reason with delays of proceedings has been mainly due to lack of resources, and for this I mean delays with examination of forensic evidence, but also lack, for example, of juvenile prosecutors, which again, since we consider that 85% of victims are minor girls, then there is a huge need of juvenile staff in place. But also one of the reasons that we analyzed as being the cause of delays has been what has been mentioned also before by Ms. Bala, the absence of standard operating procedure and specific guidelines that will guide the work of the different institutions involved. When it comes to termination of cases and also acquittals, and that's where majority of the recommendation of our report went towards, we unfortunately noticed still an incorrect application, an incorrect understanding, let's say, of the gender nature of this kind of criminal offenses. And what I mean by this is that although the legal framework correctly regulates the criminal offense as a consent-based one, we saw that the main reason for termination and acquittals has been the lack of the proof of violence, or the lack of physical of resistance on behalf of the victim. So this seems to have been determining factors for the prosecutor and the judges, authorities to terminate or acquit. And this, of course, is quite worrying, and much of our recommendation aimed towards this, considering that, in fact, this kind of criminal offenses, especially sexual violence, should be really looked at and dealt with and handled with the gender understanding of the criminal offense itself. And when it comes to number, specifically on judgments, we looked at 36 judgments. More than 1/3 of these were terminated with acquittals, and of the other 20s, like Ms. Bala was referring before, more than half were sentenced with below the minimum sentences imposable. So again, we recognized problems and difficulties in fully understanding the nature of the criminal offense and handling the cases accordingly. So our report provided a different institution with recommendation on effective investigation and prosecution of cases, but also effective adjudication of cases, as well as all sorts of other recommendations. We had a strong look and a strong focus on the importance of data collections, which is also very important if we need to effectively scope the phenomenon and how to properly shape policies around it. But also, we also had the focus on the principle of due diligence and how enough resources and proper resources need to be put in place so that the institution can adequately handle these cases. Thank you.
Hvala. Gospođo Rikalo, vi ste...
Thank you, Ms. Riking. So you have seen some houses in Novo Brdo. What it is like in Serb-speaking areas? Are there any reports about rapings? And maybe there were women who had domestic violence. Thank you for your invitation, and I would like to stress the work of the first safe house, which after the acceptance of the victims of domestic violence from the Serb-speaking areas, although although we have also accepted victims from other Serb-speaking regions, and the first one that we received was a 17-year-old one who was maltreated by their parents, so that we managed to offer her this specialized support, not as a person that was exposed to that kind of violence, but to a young woman who should be given strength and to believe in herself and to forget some moments that happened from her father and mother. So the safe house was opened in 2020, and in that period of time, and up to date, we had 82 victims. We can say that we have received children as well, because children as witnesses of the maltreating by the family and the sexual harassment, they are here, so the victims themselves are there. So we never separate them from the mother, and we always show the number of women and the number of children. Last year we had 41 cases of rape in entire Kosovo, and this year this number has been increased. As Ulex lady said, the larger percentage is of young women. And there is the case of the Roma girl from Gilan who was maltreated by some young people. She was taken to the hotel, and then it came to sexual harassment, touching, and so on. And her brother went to help her, and the director who reported the case. The entire process went to the court, so that at the end, when we should have the decision on the judgment, parents have withdrawn the charges because they said they could not stay in Kosovo, and they did so. As far as Serb community is concerned, we recognize women who are victims of domestic violence, and they are also victims of sexual harassment, but they don't want to speak of that because they are so educated, because it would be a stigma and a shame for their families to report such cases. But they confirmed and said that their story will remain there, and they said that it can be reported, but not other people can hear about it. As far as patriarchal education is concerned, and the surroundings, when we have families here, they prevent the woman to say what is she exposed to. And they also said to the coordination center, so we had physical, psychological, economic violence and sexual harassment. And women say, you know what? Many a time my husband won't say, did you sign to sleep with me? You will sleep with me whenever I want to, and not whenever you want to. So if we want to speak to young people and to young women, if we said no, then it should be really no, and not to remain silent and to be subject to hurtings and to verbal assaults. Thank you, Mr. Ricolo. Mr. Haidari, we heard in the protest that were held a couple of days ago in Pristina, and now we have addresses against the Kosovo justice system. What has the Ombudsperson institution undertaken in this case? Thank you for the invitation. When we speak for the human rights in Kosovo, we should have in mind all the conventions, international conventions, or international standards that are foreseen by these conventions that the Republic of Kosovo has included in Article 22 of the Constitution, and which are a constitutional guarantee for the protection of fundamental human rights and freedoms. The right to be safe is a fundamental right of human beings, which is closely related to the human dignity and personal integrity of the person. Since Ombudsperson institution is an institution which defends and promotes the basic human rights, which acts as an organ of equality, as a national mechanism for the prevention of torture. Following news for the case of the 11-year-old girl, it opened investigations ex officio to verify and to assess if competent authorities of Kosovo have acted in compliance with the domestic legislation, country's constitution, and the other international conventions which are part of the constitutional and judicial system of Kosovo, and they have priority to local laws. The purpose of the investigation is to verify if all state mechanisms have respected these conventions, if they have acted in compliance with the action procedures that they should have done, because since we are speaking of a juvenile, then the situation is more difficult than in other cases. Let me also remind you once more that Kosovo is already an implementer of the Istanbul Convention, which foresees various actions for the protection of women in the country, starting from the actions through administrative measures, criminal measures. We are also implementers of the European Convention for the Protection of Fundamental Human Rights and Freedoms and its judicial practice. Therefore, we took over serious objections to protect the rights of our people, and we should act in line with the commitments that we have undertaken. In the case of the murder of a woman in Lausha, we have conducted an investigation ex officio, and the results that they have not, that the standards have not been applied as they ought to, as they are applicable in Kosovo police in respective prosecution office. So as a result of a non-efficient implementation, there were deficiencies that led to the tragedy in this case. And even through this case, as an institution for the protection of fundamental human rights, we demand from all competent institutions in the Republic of Kosovo to effectively and efficiently conduct independent investigations to shed light on every situation like this. I'm referring to the juvenile 11-year-old that was raped, to bring the perpetrators to justice and to punish such perpetrators. We also consider it important to work in the prevention phase of such actions. This means the education of our children, effective programs in the schools that would make it clear to the pupils and to all that this is the right to be safe, and it's a basic life and it cannot be violated by anyone. Finally, we shall play our role as an institution by handling individual requests and by contributing through investigations ex officio and by sending concrete recommendations to competent authorities how to act in such cases, how to remedy violations and to improve if there are such as politics, institutional and legislative, which can constitute a deficiency which cannot be in compliance with international standards that are part of the country's constitution. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Haidari. Now we open the discussion. Does anybody from the present has any question or any comment? Yeah. I would ask Ms. Ricalo if she can repeat the numbers concerning the women that are victims of the sexual violation and harassment. From the police data, last year there were 41 reports of sexual harassment and violence, and this year up to July, 107. 85%, as mentioned by the lady from the ULEX, they are juveniles. Since I think that in the protest in Pristina it was said that there are 36 cases reported only in this year. I got the data from our internet web page from the police. We usually follow the reporting of the women that were victims of sexual harassment and violence. In 2021, and in this case, in this year, I think they are 1,100. So we follow those data because of the reason to see if this is only the influence of corona or COVID virus, which happened recently, or it is the increase of the awareness at women that they want to report the perpetrator. And that's why we follow the police report and our report that we have in the safe house. So it does not mean only in the raping, but also in domestic violence as well. That's it. I wanted to make a division here. We have to do with two categories of victims. Victims of sexual violence and victims of sexual harassment. The numbers of the reportings of harassment and sexual violence differ. In the last 2 years, the number of sexual violence, sexual rapings has been increased, especially during the time of the pandemic. So we have them divided with regions as to where the largest number of the rapings was. In 2000 and in 2019, the region of Feruzai was leading. In 2020, it was Pristina. In 2021, it was again Pristina with sexual violence. And in the last 6 months of 2022, we still have Pristina, but not taking apart Ferizai and Mitrovica. At the sexual harassment reportings, it is a general reporting from all the municipalities, and they report such sexual harassments, but not every reporting, be it sexual harassment, ends in police. There is hesitation from the victims because of the identity, the requests and various requests. Whereas when they file a request for reporting, I speak always about sexual violence with including sexual harassment. Every reporting should be attached to the action, because reporting opens the way to the action, be it from the police side or from the victim defender or the prosecutors or from the social worker. The action, because we are addressing very clearly the standard operation procedures, these procedures that emerge from the law and from the criminal code are clear procedures that clarify the role, responsibility, the task and duty of every official who deals with the management of the case. So when the procedures fail, the whole case fails. There is no clear picture as to who offered what kind of service to the victim. If I am not wrong, I should verify once more the information. In the first 6 months of this year, we have around 50 reported cases of sexual violence. For your information, in the Ministry of Justice, there is the database which gathers all the information concerning domestic violence and gender violence. And this database has a clear picture of every institution separately for the service it offered for the case of the victim, from the moment when it is reported to the police up to the sheltering, because it is a series of actions that are interlinked with the victim. So the number of reportings changes. It's not the same one for sexual violence and sexual harassment. These are two separate reportings, but they have a common denominator, and we always have to do with the gender aspect when we speak of the rapings and sexual harassments.
No, thank you. Just to continue on this topic, because it's really important. So when we talk about sexual violence, this term, like Ms. Bala was saying, encompasses several criminal offenses. You have sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape. And for example, in our report, we decided to focus exactly on rape, which is Article 227 of the Criminal Code, because you have to understand, and also when they are reported, the cases, each offense is a different article in the criminal code. And that's why it's difficult to talk of numbers in general about sexual violence offenses, because we should always differentiate what kind of sexual violence offense you're looking at: rape, sexual harassment, sexual assault. So for example, strictly on number of rape, you can see in the report in 2019 there were 57 cases reported, 2020 there were 64, and 2021 107. And there you also see the increase in reporting of rape cases over the last 2 years. So this is a very good question, because it's also important that, especially you as journalists, also, when you report on this data, also you understand that it's important also to differentiate on, on which kind of sexual violence offense we're focusing on. Thank you.
I wanted to interlink with the colleagues concerning the number of the reported cases of sexual violence. Although we see that in police there are many cases that are reported, but based on the findings from the Kosovo Women Network, especially the cases monitored by us in the Kosovo courts, there are very few cases that are registered in the registers of the courts, especially at the basic court of Pristina and in the other courts. Why is this a non-compliance of the reported cases in the police with the number of cases registered in the courts and in prosecution offices? we come to the conclusion that a lot of cases are being reported in the police, but very few cases that prosecutions issue a ruling for the initiation of procedure so that the case can go further to the court and to have court sessions further. Anybody else that wants to take the floor? This statistics has been taken from ULEX, and the number has been doubled recently compared to 2020 and 2021 when we had 107 cases. Does this mean that in a way the awareness has been increased, that victims are reporting the criminal cases, or do you have in percentage those data? What is the number of unreported cases, and why victims hesitate to report the cases? I think that in some recent reports, there were about 90% of cases of rape and sexual violence which have not been reported.
So as it is the case for domestic violence, it's always difficult to understand whether there has been a real increase of cases or whether there is more awareness and a capacity of victims of coming forward. So this is always a difficult assessment to carry out for sure. This has been the case with domestic violence. What we have seen that since 2017, where Kosovo started implementing a lot of awareness raising campaign, reporting has been increased. So there must be a connection to increased awareness, and I would say it's the same also for reporting of sexual violence cases. What we mentioned in the report is that we could also not assess the impact of the COVID pandemic because we don't have data to assess this. But we also mentioned something else. There has been a change in the current code since 2019. So with the current code, any sexual intercourse happening between teenagers with more than 2 years of age difference automatically becomes a rape, which was not the case with the previous code. So what we say in the report is this might have an impact also on the increase of reported rape cases. But definitely understanding effectively how much is the increase and how much is the raised awareness and the more capacity of victims to come forward, it's always difficult to ascertain. And this is the same with domestic violence cases. I would say it's the same with all sorts of gender-based violence offenses because of the nature of the criminal offenses. I don't know if someone else wants to add.
Iz svega ovoga što smo do sada čuli.
From all that we heard so far, it comes out that there is a legal basis, there are laws, there is a constitution, there are protocols and conventions and so on. In this range, something somewhere misses, and the victim that has been raped or the domestic violence suffers. Do you have evidence, for instance, did that judge from Peja has been suspended, the judge who declared the victim guilty and not the perpetrators, and to render a respective punishment? I understand the ombudsperson. He comes when something happens, but where's the police? Where's the prosecution office? And is it true? And I agree with someone who said that we should expel judges and prosecutors and bring someone who wants to really work. If we refer to the last statement of the Basic Prosecution Office in Pristina for the 11-year-old girl case, according to them, the case prosecutor par excellence has finished the case. This is the assessment that is done by the Basic Prosecution Office in Pristina. In fact, We have two victims that were sexually used. On the other hand, both councils, the prosecutorial and the judicial council, have their own internal disciplinary mechanisms. And if we refer to their statements, for the disciplinary measures that they have undertaken against the prosecutor or the judge, they are the downgrading in the post and the return to the job again. But so far, in no court, in no prosecution office, no judge and no prosecutor has been dismissed from the justice system for the negligence of the cases. We have the cases of the murder of women, where the prosecutor failed and the judge failed with the decision, and no measures has been undertaken against those persons. But the prosecutorial and judicial system is an independent one, is the third power, and I think that there should be a debate with them in order to see the situation concerning those mechanisms and disciplinary measures that are being undertaken against the prosecutors. If we really had appropriate disciplinary measures, the situation would be much different. And of course, we would speak today about the just actions or proper actions concerning the cases of domestic violence, sexual harassment, and the gender-based violence in general. Unfortunately, this inaction and the improper implementation of the law, the cases are increasing every day, be they rapings or domestic violence. Does anybody have any question anymore? I am interested to know if you have any number and how many cases have been resolved cases of rape in Kosovo.
Yes, sorry, I'm just looking at the data because we also assessed, so in our report we assessed the number of cases reported to the Kosovo police. I'm talking about rape, so Article 227 as we said then. How many of these cases went on into investigation, and there we assessed 153 cases. And then we went on and we looked at 36 judgments issued by court. So as our report sees, it's a bit difficult, again, going back to data, because, for example, KP collects data, let's say, based on Article 227, so rape. But the prosecution keeps statistics on all criminal offenses against sexual integrity. So it was difficult to understand by just sending a request to the prosecution how many of the cases fell under the criminal offense of rape. And then we encountered the same problem with courts. But if you look at the report, you can see how there are regional differences also. So there are some offices that have a higher percentage of investigation. So we're talking about the phase from criminal report at KP level and then going into the investigation stage at prosecution level. So some regional offices have higher rate of investigation than other, and it's the same with basic courts. So some basic courts have higher rates of terminated cases, whether acquittal or convictions, than others. So you can have, I refer you to the report because there you can see the percentages, but bearing in mind that because of the problem with classifying the criminal offenses, it was also complicated to collect the data on the specific cases of rape.
If we refer to the cases as to how many cases have been sentenced. In the report, we have 225 cases according to the study. It is very interesting to see the report, especially at punishments. Such facilitations have been created for the perpetrators. For instance, he has been sentenced on condition 9 months for a rape case, and the reasoning was this. The perpetrator committed to have committed the crime. He is in a difficult economic situation. He is a family member. He comes from the village. He feels guilty that he has committed the offense, and he repents that he has committed the crime. So we have some alleviating measures that a judge takes against a raper to come to this 5, 6, or 7 months prison, but protection from freedom. We have very little cases where we have aggravating circumstances. Aggravating from 5 years to 20 years as foreseen by the criminal code for the case of rape, and the cases of rape of juveniles. If we compare these two pictures, the number of cases that have been punished, be it with a fine or on condition, or just for the sake of appearance, is much higher. And the number of cases that have received cases as foreseen by the criminal code is very, very small. Is it maybe because of this necessary to change that punishment policy, since we know that the maximal sentence in Kosovo is 20 years for juveniles, if the victim is a juvenile? And I think in Serbia it is a lifelong sentence. In Macedonia it's a lifelong sentence. In Bosnia there is no limitation. In that sense, should we change the punishment policy and leave it to the judges and prosecutors some room to punish or to fine or to condemn the doers of the action? The punishment policy should change, not only with the measure of imprisonment, but with the other measures, because it is not only imprisonment against violators, but there are other measures. In Macedonia, there are other punishments that are foreseen, not only prison sentence or capitalization of the punishment. We are on discussion for the change of the criminal code, not only at the cases of sexual violence, but at the domestic violence as well. Does anybody else has any question? Does any of the panel members have anything to add? Something else. One of the factors that affects in the prolongation of these cases, or better says, in non-merit punishments of sexual violence, they are the lengthy court procedures, where from October 2021 to August the 1st, 2022, from about 100 hearing sessions monitored. So we have not only sexual violence included, but we have domestic violence. 140 sessions, and over 35 have been postponed because of the non-presence of the defendant. And they were usually done because the accused person was missing, and the accusers or the rapers have been escaping court procedures, and this makes the court procedures to prolong. And based on some cases that we have monitored, the court has issued convictions not on merit by freeing or acquitting the accusers from all the criminal offenses. So they remained unsentenced. In addition to following the work of the judges and prosecutors, we would like to say that prevention is on top priority. So through education of women and young girls to report the kinds of violence that they are exposed to. And they would make them react faster and take protective measures. During the workshops that we had with the children of schools, we recognized that the sexual harassment counts as a children's game, such as compliments, touching, and things like that. As some children's games. So we think that it should be done. But when we showed on the workshop all this, especially girls reacted on that, and we heard on the call that they said, "Don't harass me sexually." It was kind of a compliment. So you have a good thighs, you have a good breast, and when we talk to them, the first step is prevention, and we should start this not only from the school, but even at the kindergarten. Concerning the protection of the victims of domestic violence and domestic sexual violence, we have the Kosovo laws, which include the Istanbul Convention of 2011, and if it was signed in 2020, it says that we have gender equality, and it should be amended and supplemented according to the convention. Third one, which is rehabilitation and reintegration of victims. This is our weakest point, because if we admit such victims to the safe house, we educate them for some business or some other job or the hobby that they have. What will they do when they go out of the safe house? Where shall they go? She has no housing, no work. Children could go to school. And in what manner can we resolve this one? It means that in addition to offering these specialized help to the safe house, so we should pay more attention to the inclusion or the integration or reintegration of the victims in the society. The colleague asked a couple of moments ago about the number of not reported cases. How many not reported cases, and why do victims not report the cases? If we refer to the report, to various reports, especially to the report of the Kosovo Women Network, every fourth woman suffers domestic violence. Yes, the number of cases that are not reported is much higher compared to the number of the reported cases. We should all come up together, because none of us here in the room are not victims of domestic violence or harassment or rapes, and none of us has any guarantee that we shall become next victims. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because we should build the narration of supporting of every person, whoever she is, because through reporting we work in the direction of, I am not saying rehabilitation because we are far away from rehabilitation, but we build the narration of action. Of course, each of us knows in our environment that somebody is a victim of domestic violence and we hesitate to report it. We always expect reporting directly from the victim. The reporting should not be done always from the victim. It's the last case or instance when the victim reports the case, because it will pass years in the cycle of violence until she is back to the wall and report the case. So by letting the report on the shoulders of the victim, but the reporting should be done by every one of us. We should work in breaking the mentality, access that we have to the family, approach that we have to the family and the institution, because I don't know if this word can be translated into Serbian. It is difficult for men to have their authority broken, and when their authority is broken, then we shall have violence because the authority is broken, because the violence starts from this mentality. And it is deeply rooted in our families. It doesn't happen only in Kosovo. Domestic violence is worldwide spread. States have built mechanisms against violence, and we are in the phase of building the mechanisms that we are short of. We have some mechanisms, and the strengthening of the current mechanisms as a reply to the domestic violence. It is not a shame to report the case. It is a sin to know and to leave a woman, a man, a girl, a boy as a victim of violence, being completely aware that violence has taken place and not reported at the appropriate institutions. The appeal is general. We are obliged and responsible to report wherever we see violence in order to prevent a victim, be it of violence or, we always say, let it be the last one, of the murder. We are the ones that should work in prevention through reporting. I just wanted shortly to link with what is said by the advisor to the minister. It is exactly that. I used to work a lot in the prevention of torture, and I visited all the places where the people deprived of freedom are being held. And in Kosovo, in a pavilion of the prison, I visited the persons that have committed domestic violence. And it was strange for me to hear their comments. For instance, I remember a comment very well. This is a bad state because it imprisoned me. I beat only my wife, not somebody else's wife. So it is clear that we should work a lot in the removal of this mentality, strange mentality. It is also important to highlight that it is necessary that if the perpetrators of such crimes end up in prisons, prisons should have efficient programs for their rehabilitation. Otherwise, it is a great risk that they can get out even worse than they went to the prison initially. Thank you. Just to add, I don't want to. We are currently working in the program of Kosovo concerning rehabilitation of the rapers. We have never had a program. We are in the last but one phase of the working group because we dare not see the raper in the prison as a criminal, and we should not tolerate a raper to come out as a criminal in the street. We strongly believe that every of them can be helpful for the society, for the family, and why not as a model against those men and boys who use violence and a kind of a trainer of them? So not only as a raper, but every prisoner should be treated and work with them so that they will come out tomorrow useful for the family, state, and the country. Just shortly, because we are to end, and I wanted to say at the institutional trust of victims, I think that sexual violence victims have lost their trust in justice institutions, since whenever they went to report the cases of sexual violence, they have been victimized by being interrogated by police continuously, and then the interviews that they gave at the prosecution office maybe once, twice, and then in court hearings. So it would be good to work in the improvement of the service standards for the victims of sexual violence as it is provided by the strategy of the government as one of the main objectives to provide general services, specific services for the treatment of these cases. To provide human resources and financial resources to fight sexual violence and to protect our girls and women. I thank the panelists that took part in this and all the rest that take part here. Thank you.